is Bob Tribe, and I'm with Valley to Vietnam, and today we're interviewing another Vietnam veteran, Michael Rushton. Michael, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it very much.
Thank you for being here, and thank you for your service. You were born in Chico in 1946.
Correct. I'm a Valley boy.
Oh,
I've
yeah.
been in the Valley pretty much all of my life, except for 2 years in the Army.
I lived there for 8 years, and as a lad, we lived in Bidwell Park, which was just a great place to grow up in.
Absolutely. Walk there every day in the summer to go swimming.
Yeah, great big dammed creek that was a nice huge swimming pool. You went to elementary school in Chico, in Oroville, and Merced.
Right. My father moved a lot, working for the Bank of America.
I see. Okay. And you went to high school in Merced and Sacramento.
Correct. Yeah. My senior year was in Sacramento. My dad moved to Sacramento between my junior and senior year, so I did the 1 year at El Camino High School. Graduated there.
El Camino High School, which produced some of the most brilliant kids in Sacramento, of course.
Of course.
I just happened to go there too, but no, I'm just kidding. And you hung out at places like Sam's Hofbrau, Tower Records. Place I didn't hang out at is the Carnation restaurant. I remember what that was. It was on Marconi.
Yes, it was.
Near Watt.
It was a very popular after-game spot if you wanted a banana split, which I did frequently.
Okay. Well, we would go to the Little Hearts place, cafeteria at Country Club Center and get those banana splits there.
I didn't know that one.
For one of those kids. And did you of course, probably went to Shakey's Pizza.
I did. Like my first pizza ever was Shakey's Pizza. They didn't have them in Merced or Oroville or Chico when I was growing up.
I know that's so interesting. My first pizza was at Shakey's, and I, as I mentioned earlier, I thought it was just a local pizza place, and then I go back to South Carolina to go to basic training, and here's Shakey's Pizza, so it was huge.
Huh. Yeah, well, it was the original as far as I know.
Yeah,
for me.
It was good. Let's see, at El Camino, you played baseball and you played basketball. You were on the varsity teams.
Correct, yeah. I was a bench sitter for most of it. I pitched some baseball in the baseball season, but I was a bench sitter in basketball, but had a great time. It was a great team.
That was a terrific team.
We won the Camellia tournament that year and the CDC championship, and only people that beat us, I think, were Encina and Bishop O'Dowd. Only 2 losses.
And Encina had a center who went to the, didn't he go to the pros?
He went to the pros, Jim Eakins.
Jim Eakins, yeah.
Played in the ABA.
Right, went to BYU, I think.
I think he might have, yeah.
Mormon boy.
He was eventually, I think, a 7-foot or 6'11" at least. And
yeah.
He was, yeah.
Well,
they were good.
And but you beat some teams. I noticed you guys played like St. Ignatius, and you played Downey, and some real big power.
Yeah, that was a really fun season.
That must have been one of the best basketball teams El Camino ever had.
I don't know. The coach, of course, took that glory with him to UOP, along with Bob Krulish, our star.
Oh yeah, right.
And he eventually coached at Cal.
Yeah, Dick
Edwards.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And you graduated in 1963.
Correct, yeah. Graduated in 63, then immediately moved across the causeway to Davis to start college.
So you went to UC Davis and you were majoring in what, environmental science or what?
They didn't have environmental science back in those days. I started actually in zoology and ended up with a degree in geography, physical geography, so soils and geology and all that stuff.
One of your classmates, who we were talking about earlier, Ray Threlkeld, had a degree in geology and a guy working for oil and mining companies.
Right, that was one way I could have gone. I just ended up, when I got out of college, the environmental movement was just getting rolling in '72 after my master's, and they were hiring anybody that could write and knew something about some of the environmental issues.
I remember my college roommate told me that I was wasting a lot of time doing all that study, because basically what it came down to is if you could write well and speak well, that's all you needed, according to him.
That's Partly true.
That
You know,
worked well for
those are
him,
the
I
first
have to
two things you
admit.
have to check off a list when you're trying to hire somebody,
I
right?
have to admit, that did work well for him, even though he didn't study very much. But he's a pretty bright guy.
Yeah.
You worked at the Bank of America during college, and what did you do there?
Yeah, my dad got me those jobs after I got out of high school. The original computer center for Bank of America in this area was in West Sacramento, back when they did everything on punch cards.
Right.
And they would get all the bank mail and all the transactions and run them through that center. They called it the Irma Center at night, and then they had people that took the mail and delivered the mail to places and brought it back, and then ran this stuff through the computers. And then I was a reconciler, trying to check what the computer said versus what the lady at the bank had typed up when she, did her final tally for the bank. So I did that for all the way through college.
It's interesting, there was not a lot of rules as far as nepotism in those days. And I wonder if your father said the same thing to you that my father said to me when he got me. My father was an engineer with the Bureau of Reclamation, and he says, I'm going to get you a job here as a summer intern, but you better be the best intern that works for the agency. And so I busted my ass, and I made sure he wasn't ashamed of me.
Similar pressure like that.
Yeah.
My dad knew the guy that ran that center out there, so he made him, he got him to take a little leap of faith that I would be able to do what they were asking me to do. So
I worked hard. I wanted to make sure he was proud of me. So
yeah, that was a very good job. I just drove back and forth the causeway from Davis to West Sacramento for years.
That's great. You don't want to do that nowadays.
It's not a good drive.
No. And you also worked as a researcher and a teaching assistant at the university.
Yes, when I got into graduate school, my major professor got me a job working in geography library, map library, managing that, and then a job helping him with his research. So, and I did some TAing some of his classes. So I was a teaching assistant for a few classes.
I love geography and geology, and I always thought that they would have been a good major for me. I've got probably 300 topographical maps, even though everybody goes electronic these days.
I love paper maps. I still do to this day, and they're great tools. And so, it was a good major. It's a very general major, but it allowed you to study a lot of different subject matter.
Yeah. Remind me to tell you my National Geographic story later.
Okay.
As far as maps. And you graduated from college in 1968, or?
Yes, I finished undergraduate school in '68, 1 year late because I laid out of school a year to make enough money to not flunk out with trying to study and work in the evenings and that. So I graduated in '68, immediately applied for grad school over there. Got into grad school in the fall of '68, and then I got my second draft notice just after I'd gotten in school.
Right.
Now, my draft board was right across the street here in the post office here, and I went over and tried to get my deferment continued, and they said, well, we'll let you finish your first quarter, but you're drafted as of January 10th.
Now, was it based on the number of units you were carrying, or were they basing it on the time of the year you took off, or what?
I think it was the year I took off. They kind of let me off the hook when I got back into school.
Yeah.
They tried to draft me right at the end of the year I took off.
Right.
But I'd gotten re-registered as an undergraduate. They said, okay, finish your undergraduate work. They did that. When I got into grad school, they said, well, we're not going to let you go all the way through grad school. We're going to take you now. So I did 1 quarter of graduate work and then was drafted.
I did 1 semester of graduate work and then joined.
So you know that.
I was getting that drafted anyway. So.
Yeah.
You did basic training in AIT at Fort Lewis, Washington.
Yeah, I was surprised. It seems like all the kids that I knew had gone to Fort Ord or someplace like that and ran around in the sand.
I think there was some change in there because people who went in earlier knew, here in California, went to Fort Ord, but it seems like if you went in the later 60s, you went to Fort Lewis. Yeah,
it was really, and I'd never been up there. We flew up there and there was snow on the ground at Fort Lewis in January of 1969, so we were running around and
that was when you went in
doing push-ups and in the snow to start off. I mean, didn't stay on the ground very long, but
right.
It was a cold place.
Yeah. How did you find basic training differing from graduate school?
Well, you certainly didn't make any decisions on your own.
No.
You know, the main thing, of course, with basic training is they teach you that you follow orders and don't ask questions, and it doesn't matter whether it makes sense or not. So,
and they can be severe in their punishment.
they can be very severe. There was a lot of 5 in the morning fallouts with, you know, for whatever reason, things weren't clean enough, or somebody didn't have their foot locker organized right, or just for fun to go running around at 5 in the morning.
Sure, one person screws up and sometimes they'll drop the whole platoon.
Yes.
Yeah, this is where you learn team building.
That's exactly what
Or
they
team
were doing.
throttling.
Yeah, that's how you weed out the people that, and actually it's a skill that wasn't that much lost on me in Vietnam. You had to weed out the people that went to the field with you because you didn't want them being screw-ups, basically.
I know a lot of friends who said, you know, I don't want that platoon leader on either one of my flanks, you know, and sometimes, of course, they couldn't control that. But
yeah, you couldn't always control it, but the platoon leader and the squad leaders were pretty good at identifying the guys that were either smoking marijuana or drinking too much or were too, you know, uncontrolled. They would stay back when we would go to the field.
So you arrived in Vietnam in June of '69?
Yes, June 10th, 1969, flew into Benoit, like everybody else, I guess, and sent to Mekong in the Delta for a couple of weeks of Ninth Infantry Division in-country training, you know, all of the stuff that they teach you about how to keep yourself safe.
Right.
And
how many weeks of that?
I think it was 2 weeks that we were there in Mekong doing that training, and then I was assigned to a unit that was a bunch of Australians that they wanted to have a couple of American troops working with. It's sort of like a MACV advisory group, only they were Australians. And so I was with them for a month, I think, before I got sent back to the main Ninth Division, a little further north in Canaan province.
That 2 weeks of orientation training, or how to stay alive in the field, did you find that worthwhile?
I did. I think that, you know, they went into some things that you just either didn't have time or wasn't specific enough when you were doing advanced infantry training. So
the guys who were old salts, who had a couple of tours, were pretty good at explaining things.
Yeah, they definitely drilled into you caution in the field, and personal hygiene, and lots of things that you just needed to know to stay as healthy as you could.
I know, you know, a lot of people talked about getting scratches that would quickly get infected, or scrapes or whatever.
Absolutely, yeah, I've experienced that. You know, I suppose everybody that went over there, you know, had that initial heavy fever, sickness, everything that went right through you.
Trench foot.
Yeah, all those things that you got exposed to early on, and you just eventually learned how to avoid them or live with them.
Well, you're in the Delta. Were you doing a lot of water stuff?
Yeah, we were in the water all the time. It was mostly in the rice fields and then the wood lines along the waterways, whether they were canals or branches of the Mekong River.
Right.
And that's where all the Viet Cong were usually hanging out, so we would be running through the rice fields during the day, and then in the evening moving into positions, capture positions at night in the wood lines.
Would you, like if you were setting up in the evening, would you then again move in the dark?
No. We would wait until just dusk, and then people would be assigned positions, and you would go as a two-man team and set up on a
listing post or whatever,
on a trail or a rice paddy dike or whatever it was, and then, you know, take turns all through the night, one awake, one sleeping, and you were supposed to interdict anybody that was moving at night. Nobody was supposed to be moving at night.
What if your partner fell asleep?
Was a bad thing.
Would that happen?
It happened, of course, yeah, but you didn't want to be with somebody that couldn't stay awake for, I think we did 2-hour
Right.
shifts, and then we would go just back and forth. And sometimes we were actually in the rice paddy itself,
Yeah.
off the dike, so we'd be wet all
Sure.
the time. It was always wet.
You'd have long days, though. Imagine it was hard to stay awake, when
Yeah, days were sometimes,
heavy packs.
yeah, sometimes we would be moving, and it would be a long day. Some days we weren't going very far, and sometimes we were supported by armored personnel carriers. So we had provisions, and we actually, when we moved long distances, we had a track to ride on top of to get from point A to point B.
One of my good high school friends from our high school got sent over and became an R&R officer at Vung Tau. And he started feeling so guilty about it that he volunteered for the field, and he ended up with one of those armored cab units in the Delta there.
Could have been very easily our unit. We were Ninth Infantry Mechanized,
Yeah.
and so we didn't have tanks, but we had APCs, and we had track-mounted big guns and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So
I think he did that, and then he was a MACV advisor to a South Vietnamese armored cab unit. So,
we did things very similar to what I did. So
Yeah.
I worked with a MACV unit for about 3 or 4 months.
so were you wounded?
I was,
Yeah.
yeah.
Tell us about that story.
We didn't, my unit didn't have that much action. We were in firefights once in a while. The biggest risk was booby traps.
Right.
Because we were moving through villages, through agricultural areas, and through these wood lines, and so most of our casualties were related to booby traps rather than live fire.
Would the booby traps be grenades or bouncing betties or?
Mostly grenades, in fact, not very sophisticated grenades
Right.
in my case. It was the one day I carried the M60 machine gun my whole tour. The guy was sick, and I was second in line walking this dike, and the guy in front of me tripped a grenade, and he got pretty severely injured, and I just got a few pieces of shrapnel, and we both got flown out for short R&R.
Right. Yeah. And then you're back again.
Oh yeah, back again. As
Yeah.
soon as it looks like you're healing up, you're back at it.
And the system usually was the junior officers who were platoon leaders or whatever would be out in the field for 6 months, and then they get a staff job, but not so with the enlisted men.
No, they didn't. It didn't work that way. Although partway through, I did get this different job. It was assigned to a MACV advisory team across the other side of this village where our base camp was, and there was a South Vietnamese rural force encampment, a little enclosure where they lived with their families, and there was 5 MACV soldiers there to act as their go-between between the U.S. Army and their units, and so I got sent over there with another guy from my unit to be the Ninth Division representatives in that rural force operation. So we went to the field with them, acted as their radio operators, and communicating on night positions and
Right.
all that kind of stuff. So
That was a better job.
it was a much better job. You weren't in the field as often,
Yeah.
for sure. So yeah.
You mentioned something in the, I believe in the questionnaire that I connected with, and that was I saw the Army as this kind of sociological experiment. My whole life had been California. That's all I knew, and I thought all Americans were like that. And suddenly I go in the Army, and I'm helping this white kid from Kentucky, Paducah, Kentucky, write a letter to his girlfriend because he didn't know how to write. And I'm thinking, how did he get in the Army? And after a while, I could identify a Mississippi accent from a Virginia accent, but not from an Alabama accent. And
Yeah.
People were so different. You met gang members from New York, and bricklayers from Philadelphia, and cowboys from Texas, and farmers from Georgia.
That was probably the greatest learning experience
It really was.
of the whole Army. tour was all the people that you got exposed to. I lived in California all my life, never been on an airplane until I flew to Vietnam, and so then they were, my first platoon sergeant was a guy that built motorcycles for Hell's Angels people in San Francisco,
Oh.
bald-headed guy, the big mustache, and there were kids there from Alabama and Detroit city guys, and New York kids, and so it was really incredible to see how they all came together.
Well, in our high school, my wife grew up in Richmond,
Mm-hmm.
and I pretty much grew up in Carmichael, and she says, sometimes refers to me as the white boy from Carmichael.
Absolutely.
Because I remember in the year I graduated from high school, there were 2 African Americans in our whole high school, 2,400 kids. I mean, it's nice to see it's much more diverse now, because I go back to the scholarship award.
Oh, do you?
Presentation.
Yeah.
Because we have one in the name of our student body president who died of leukemia, our senior year, Steve Lentz, and it's great to see that
It's more diverse,
oh,
yeah.
it's much more diverse. But so, not only was I used to Californians, but I was used to just a lot of white people, and so it was great, becoming friends with people of different races and perspectives.
It really was. It was really interesting to just learn behaviors, the whole black versus white thing that you hear about so much. I didn't see it that much. My unit was not. There wasn't a lot of severe issues.
Right.
But they all had their own handshakes and signals and stuff like that.
It's complicated.
And they wore the towels around their necks when they were in base camp. And so there was some real cultural things that you got to see. And
It's almost like you needed a degree of kinesiology to understand the handshakes.
Yeah, there were some pretty crazy things. But it was
it was great.
it was the best part of the whole tour, was learning about all these different people.
Yeah. So you come home and you're in one piece,
I was.
and probably the first thing you did is want to go back to school.
Yeah, that was my goal. Unfortunately, I didn't extend my service over there so that I could get out when I came home.
Oh,
So I came home and had a few weeks off, and then spent my last 3 or 4 months in the service at Fort Carson, Colorado, in a mechanized infantry, I think it was the 5th Infantry Division, and they had absolutely nothing for us to do there. But that's where I finished my military career, was in Fort Carson, Colorado. But it was, coming home was probably one of the more memorable days of my entire life. So.
Is Fitzsimmons Army Hospital right at Fort Carson or close by?
I don't remember if it's there or not. There was an Air Force base, I think it was called Peterson, and now it's called, maybe it's Ant Air Force Base.
Uh-huh.
And then there was Fort Carson, and then of course right next door is the Air Force Academy.
Right.
So they're all around Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of military presence there.
Sure. It's a nice place.
Yeah.
But eventually you go back to school as you ETS.
I did. I went back to school. I got a couple of months early out to go back to school in the end of October of 1970. So I think I got out 3 months early.
Uh-huh.
I had applied, got accepted back into graduate school, and the Army decided we weren't doing anything anyway at Fort Carson, so they gladly let me out.
Well, that's great. And then
Early.
you got your degree in...
Got my master's degree in geography, and just shortly thereafter got a job in environmental consulting right across the bypass in Sacramento.
Oh.
So I've lived in Davis and commuted to Sacramento since about 1963.
Jeez.
Pretty much.
Yeah, given the other jobs.
Given
too.
the other
Yeah.
jobs
Right.
in college, so I'm sort of the ultimate causeway commuter for this area.
Well, my old office was at 5th and J.
Oh,
The old Travelers
Yeah.
Hotel. Yeah, so I was there for several years, since 85 to 2007, I guess. So,
yeah. We started on 455 Capitol Mall, back in 72 when I started at the company, and we moved to several places in town, but now we're back at 7th and K Street. Our wall butts up against the new stadium for the Kings. So.
Okay. And what's a typical kind of thing that you would do if you're hired as a consultant for someone?
Most of our work was just doing either natural resources planning kinds of things and natural resources management support or environmental impact assessments.
Okay.
So, and we worked for all different levels of government, federal, state, local, a lot of water districts and special districts, and then the private sector. So we had kind of a broad spectrum of clients that had to comply with environmental regulation after all the stuff that came in the 70s.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Great. Well, and you're married. Do you have kids?
I'm married. Been married for 43 years, I guess.
Wow.
And have 2 kids, a daughter 33, a son 30.
Uh-huh. Grandkids?
No grandkids, no, not even
They're not doing that.
not any
these
prospects
days.
even, you know. So
Oh well. Well, Mike, I'd just like to thank you for coming in today, and thank you for your service.
well, I appreciate being offered the opportunity.
Well, I think the library has a wonderful project in this Valley of Vietnam. I'm really happy to be a small part of it. So-
Yeah, I'm looking forward to looking at some of the film that you shot earlier.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you
Yeah.
again.
Thank you.
That completes another episode of Valley to Vietnam. Please join us next time.